Welcome to Forward Physio, the show that gives you high-quality information about injury and rehabilitation, performance, and health. I am Noah Mandel, and I'm a physical therapist in Toronto, Canada. The purpose of this podcast is to give you educational content, not medical advice. So if you are dealing with a health-related concern, please take it up with your healthcare professional. If you enjoyed the podcast, I would really appreciate it if you'd be willing to leave a review. It takes 2 seconds, and you would be doing your part in helping the podcast grow so that we could provide this information to more and more people. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoy. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. Today I spoke with Steph Allen, who is a physical therapist living in New York. With the increased prevalence in how much our society is depending on technology, it's likely that we can expect a similar shift to occur in physical therapy, and some can argue that the shift is already occurring. Certain issues like inaccessibility to physiotherapy or extremely short appointment times can likely be mitigated with some outside-of-the-box thinking and a different approach, and that is why I spoke to Steph today. Steph created something that to me is really cool, which is a fully online practice working solely with ACL patients. ACL Rehab takes a lot of work, and to me it was pretty surprising that someone can help someone rehab their ACL completely online. So I was really grateful that Steph was willing to hop onto the podcast and have a chat with me about this. I hope you learn a lot, not just about ACL Rehab, but also about how to start your own online practice, what that may look like, and the importance of being creative and thinking outside of the box, and understanding that you don't need to do the same old business model in physical therapy that we've done for years on end. That's enough from me. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Steph Allen. I think the topics that you bring are very, very interesting for 2 reasons. Number one, I love working with people coming off of ACL injuries. I think it's just one of the most interesting areas in rehab. And obviously, this is online right now, and we're transitioning into a more and more online world, and you do a lot of things related to that. So I'm really interested to pick your brain. So thanks again for joining me.
Happy to be here, Noah, and I am, bias recognized, but I also enjoy working with that. So yeah, I think we'll have a good combo.
Yeah, I think so too. So before we get into it, do you mind introducing yourself and telling everyone what you do and, just a little bit about yourself outside of the world of PT?
Good. I like that because I feel like I'm used to, at this point, I'm far enough out of school that I feel like the normal, I graduated at this time and whatnot. That story becomes really long. But I did. So I graduated PT school in 2013. So I am coming up on a decade, which is kind of weird to hear out loud, but also it's one of those things that I feel like it seems at this point like it went really fast, but so much happens in that time. So and it's been cool to kind of see how things evolve. So yeah, I graduated in 2013. I did a residency right out of school, and then an ortho residency, and then I still wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, ironically. I think most people look at me now and maybe assume that I just always from day one was obsessed with ACL rehab. There was always the interest, but it wasn't something that I dove hard into until a little bit later. And so I did travel PT for almost 2 years. Oh, and cool. Then ended up in the Boston area. I was working at the same place as Zach. And then we just recently moved to upstate New York near Rochester last February. So coming up on a year now. And then I left the clinic in 2020, later in the year in 2021. And I had started ACL Resolve, working with people virtually through ACL Rehab earlier in 2021. And so that's also coming up on 2.5, 3 years. So that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, it's scary how time flies, right?
Yes. And I mean, kind of the backdrop of all of this, because even prior to ACL Resolve and very soon after moving to Boston and kind of commiserating with Zach and some other colleagues about some of the frustrations and things that we were having within the PT world itself, that's where the Level Up Initiative and then CALU all kind of was born. So it's been a hell of a decade.
Yeah. What was it that frustrated you about the profession?
I think for me, and it might be slightly different for Zach and others, but I think a common thread was just kind of going through that existential crisis of all of these things that we're taught in school. And again, like you need to know your shit. Like you need to know anatomy, you need to know how things interact well, but there were some big holes that I noticed that I didn't feel comfortable and confident in when actually being in charge of my own caseload, which was scary enough in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of those being a lot of managing and talking about and communicating effectively through like psychological things that people have going on as it pertains to injury and pain. I think the biggest thing for me was like, how do we explain when certain things are uncertain, but still exude confidence and like
Yeah.
optimism in their outcome? And then I think really what became frustrating was how we started to realize that the general public viewed us and realizing that it was kind of our fault as a profession. That like I believed when I applied for an orthopedic manual residency that what was going to set me apart was my hands. Like that
Mm.
I was going to, and this view of us being kind of like able to fix people and take away their pain. So it was a lot of stuff that like we realized was such a contrast from not only what we learned, but also how ill-equipped we felt in certain situations, and that we really wanted to change that and ideally be involved in, raising the standard for and the expectations that people have, I think, of us, because we are, for the most part, I would assume most people coming into this profession are way more than that.
Yeah, I agree. Way more than just, people that just use their hands to fix people. And I mean, we're not even that, right? When you really look at it.
When you look at the research,
Yeah.
not so great.
No, no, not really. So then you tried to reconcile that with Zach Gabor, right? With CalU and the Level Up Initiative. What exactly are those platforms? Just so people have a good idea in case they don't know.
Yeah, so the Level Up Initiative was, it is kind of evolved now. It isn't an entity anymore in and of itself, but that was our, mostly Zach's, but I think fueled by said frustrations, was just talking about. But the original mission of the Level Up Initiative was to transform those who will transform healthcare. So our idea or our approach to taking action on this instead of complaining about it, because that's essentially what it was. We one day were just like, we keep saying the same stuff. Are we just going to say this our whole career? Or are we going to, like, I don't know, take a shot and do something about it? Try to. So the approach
Yeah.
we took was to reach out and connect with students and to mentor students, because, in our lifetime, we were already PTs. How much are we going to necessarily do in our career? It's going to be the people that come after us. And so it was a free mentorship, essentially, is what it was. And so we ran totally free mentorship for 2 years. Not the best business idea, just for those. But again, that wasn't the point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in essence, though, what we didn't anticipate was creating the incredible community that we have. And so that mentorship was really based on, it was a 4-month process. Each month had a specific theme. It evolved a little bit, but the first month was mindset. Second month was critical thinking. And the last 2 were communication. And then later on, we had exercise prescription built into that 4th month, because that was another area of really large shortcoming in
Hmm.
our curriculums. You think about it, there's so much that PT schools have to have in their curriculum that we found pretty consistently across the board, hearing from students, like it was kind of crazy when we surveyed people, like a large percentage, I don't remember what it was, would say that they wish that they had some exposure to pain science and better strength and conditioning, or in the realm of rehab, in their programs, like their Therex programs, where
Yeah, and I would
really
agree with that
that,
too.
yeah, and that's what I mean. Like, it didn't seem to be different regionally. It was pretty. So we kind of felt like that would be something really valuable to add into that, and then that sort of was the impetus of connecting with Quinn, a clinical athlete, because they had 2 or 3 years prior to us started clinical athlete, in an effort to connect the lay person, the lay athlete, with providers that were walking the walk, and we really we aligned with that in a lot of, I think, even though it was kind of through different approaches, we had very
Hmm.
similar kind of missions as far as like raising the standard of physical therapy. So that was sort of the impetus of joining forces with them, and then actually Level Up and Clinical Athlete became CALU, which, um, there's still a debate on how you say it. But and then we ran a successful online summit because we were going to do it in person in 2020, and obviously that didn't happen, so we had to pivot real quick. And that was really, really cool to see, the caliber of people coming together for a virtual summit that we didn't even think would be like possible. And so, yeah, we are actually about to, um, well, we've released it over this past year, but our exercise prescription course, essentially, that's going to, I can assure all of you that there is nothing else out there like it right now. And it's going to be, probably a mix of what people think as far as didactic and mentoring and things like that. So we're really excited for 2024.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. There's so much that we can do online. And I find, like, I speak with my dad, for example, and he's probably going to listen to this episode. So, hey, Dad. um, where he was shocked when I say that, when I said to him that you can do PT online. And I think a lot of people have an initial resistance to that. Like, how does that work? And listen, most of the people that are listening to this are probably young, right? I've looked at the demographics. It's like 25 to 34-year-olds is the majority. So a lot of you know, obviously, that PT can be done online. When I found out that you're doing ACL care online, that sort of surprised me at first, because I think there's certain cases that might fare better online, and I find that ACL rehab, it's very different from a simple case that gets better in a few weeks, where you're not working for someone for very long. Like, it's an extensive rehabilitative process, and you're doing tons of testing and tons of work with someone. So do you mind getting into how you got into ACL care online in the first place, and whether you found certain obstacles to be true?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I mean, I would be lying to you if I said that I went from working in the clinic to doing it virtually and there was zero obstacles. There's going to be pros and cons to every approach. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But
Yeah, yeah.
the the impetus for me, even because interestingly enough, like if even 6 months before I decided to do this, if you had asked me that that's what I was going to be doing in 6 months, I would have been like, yeah, okay. Um, but it actually was kind of out of necessity. So to your point, this is a long term, if done well, this recovery is a long term relationship. It is like, it's a commitment to essentially change your life a little bit for the next year. um,
Yeah.
and when I thought about how I have sort of evolved and approach even the early stages of this rehab, I rarely use my hands because these people need to be doing for example, the first, if somebody actually has surgery, like a reconstruction, ACL reconstruction,
Yeah.
for those first 2 weeks, regardless of graft, unless you have significant range of motion restrictions or they did such extensive things in there aside from the ACL that you need like almost immobilization, which is rare.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you need to be doing things that, you know, optimize things like decrease swelling, getting it moving, making sure your quads are waking up, because the earlier that happens and the stronger it comes back, the better pretty much your entire rehab is. Um, and walking normally if you don't have weight bearing restrictions. So like that kind of stuff to do. I was only seeing people twice a week because I was part time after COVID, and it wasn't enough. And people weren't progressing fast, and you have very little. I had very little control over what they were doing between sessions. It was mostly high school, college kids, and like busy working parents. And like, unless
That's
there's
tough.
another level of unless there's another level of accountability, because we're not working with professional athletes where their only job is to get better.
Mm-hmm.
So stuff comes up. People are busy. Like and so what I found myself doing, knowing that they were going to need more than we had to schedule every 30 minutes, but I would keep people there longer and, you know, programming for them between sessions via email and stuff like that. A lot of what we're not compensated for as PTs.
Yeah.
We're compensated for writing that note and getting those billing codes in. So it was more of a mix between knowing that these people needed more and for my own health reasons, to be
Mm.
honest, because I only know how to do, like, the more you learn about this and the, quote unquote, best way to manage this, knowing that there was a gap between what I could offer in the clinic that way in an insurance based model and what they actually needed, I was trying to continually close that gap, and I was suffering for it as far as, mental health. So it was really more out of necessity. And I know that may sound dramatic to some people, but when your caseload for a, between 26 and 30-hour work week in the clinic is 80 plus or 90 plus ACL cases, and
Wow.
you're talking, because at that point, just locally, it was people came to me for that. And that's, I wanted that. That is part of what I wanted to be known for, and have people know that if they came to see me, that they were going to be well taken care of. And that's great. But then, half of those people you're writing a progress note for every 2 weeks because insurance only covers them for 3 months of a ideally
Wow.
12 plus month process. You know what I mean? So there were a lot of pieces that were just, I was just spread too thin. And I kept thinking to myself, similar to the conversations that Zach and I had a few years earlier, like, there has to be a better way to do this, A, and maybe it's just not the way that I think that it looks. And B, I can keep complaining about this, or I can try to do something about it.
Mm.
So, long-winded way to say it was really just out of necessity. And so I was already part-time. I let my boss know that I was going to be taking on clients as coaching clients. I'm sure we can get to that piece too. So not
Yeah.
formal physical therapy where things are being billed or people are getting a super bill. Like, it is coaching. It's a coaching relationship, and it's a long-term commitment. And so I started to look at it more through that lens. And, you know, a few of the doubts I had were crushed pretty early, because I realized, like, with the level of accountability that people get through this medium, people that are consistent, they just do really, really well.
Mm. I find it so fascinating that you felt like you needed to take uh, more action. And the result of that was almost, in a way, like a lot of people might perceive it as taking a step back, like you're not in the clinic as much and now you're more online. And some other people might think, I'm fully playing devil's advocate here because I'm sure you do a really good job, but some other people might feel like the accountability online might be less than having to go in and see a person face to face.
Mhm.
So do you want to get into sort of what it actually looks like when you're working with people online?
Yeah, I think that's a good point because you can throw around that term accountability, um, because people think that I think like a really high level of accountability is someone expects you to physically be in a place at a specific time. So I get that, but what I see accountability as and what I've seen it sort of become in a different way here is that they are prescribed workouts and things to do in an app. We use an app called Everfit. Um, Said workouts and each movement in the workout have to be checked off. They have to say what weight they've done. There's certain things they have to film. If they miss a couple and they don't let us know why, like someone's going to check in with you.
Hmm.
And they have direct message access to us in the app. So that piece, what I saw it really help with is especially people early to like maybe, a couple months out, or if they're like going through a little bit of a setback or whatever, because that happens. Um, they don't have to wait to ask me a question between sessions.
Yeah.
You can say, hey, this isn't feeling right, or like it's kind of, they can send me a picture, they can, so it's kind of both accountability and the level of support that they're getting is totally different. So like for instance, there were times where over a weekend, someone was at the stage where maybe something we did in the clinic felt okay and they tried something else on their own and it like didn't go well. And then I see
Yeah.
them Tuesday or something like 4 days later and they haven't done anything in that time because they were afraid to do something and now it's like really stiff or whatever. It's like those kinds of things we can roll with in almost like a real time um, situation.
Right.
And I find that even some of the bumps in the road that people come across, like we're on it in a sense. In a
Hmm.
sense.
Hmm. Just hearing you say this right now is inspiring me because I work with a lot of people coming off of ACL surgeries as well, and it is an issue where they will come back, the week after or so, and give me an update, and it's like, oh man, if you just sent me an email or something, maybe this could have gotten dealt with sooner, and not blaming them, of course, but
No,
yeah, so it is. I mean, it's almost motivating. Like, oh, maybe I should start doing some of this online as well.
honestly, we need more out there. To be honest, I only really know of 4 or 5 of us who are
Wow.
actually physios doing it. At least in like the U.S. and Canada, that like that area. But what I've gathered from overseas too is that the care is interesting there. It's not, I think a lot of the consensus here in the States is very much like, this is a long process, and over there it's kind of like, okay, if you're doing good at like 3 months, you can just, go back to
Yeah.
like, gradually return. You can get a coach if you want, but like, you know, in like NHS system and things like that, I think it's just a different model. And I don't think that, unfortunately, for something like ACL recovery, that either model is a really good solution.
Yeah. I mean, 3 months is not enough. It's not even
That's
close
a
to enough.
that's not uncommon for insurance to only. I have had. I think you know what. Here's a good point. I think the last straw for me was a peer-to-peer review that I had to do for an insurance company, for an individual who was on her second ACL, same side, like re-tear within a year. Um, and she had a high enough LEFS score that, according to the criteria that this, and remember, peer-to-peer review is somebody who used to be like a PT in clinic. So this person also should understand essentially what the requirements are. So I sent in her strength testing data and all this stuff. And the only thing they looked at was her lower extremity functional score, which is a very low ceiling. It's
Yeah.
basically like, can you do your daily stuff without issues? And she was like around 3 or 4 months.
Okay, so then
And technically,
realistically, yes, you can by that time.
you should, yes, unless there's something crazy going on. So, like, the justification at that point was that the insurance company is therefore not required to cover someone if they can go about their day. And I'm like, what about sports? And she had no answer. That was just basically, so this is how the insurance companies are operating. And I was like, I understand you're doing your job. I really disagree.
Yeah.
And I just went home that night and I was like, we are in trouble.
Mm, mm.
So that's what made me start to kind of think outside the box.
Yeah. May I ask, do you remember what that patient's force testing numbers were? Like maybe the symmetry from side to
Not
side at the
good.
time?
It
Yeah.
was at 3 months, 13-year-old female, like, unfortunately, this particular individual had run into the insurance issue the first time around, and I nearly begged for her not to go back to sport, and the doctor said she could. And kids that age, it's really hard. They don't really, I don't think they understand the gravity of
Mm,
doing this rehab well. And she just wanted to play. So she played and she got through soccer season. I'm sorry, she got through basketball season okay, and then I'm sorry, soccer season okay, and then end of basketball season retour that same year back. So um, at 3 months of the second injury, she was, yeah, I mean, symmetry was not there, but symmetry was the least of the issues. Torque to body weight ratio, both sides, was pretty low.
mm. Hey physios, I know that we all know how expensive continuing education courses can be. What if you had the chance to learn from some of the brightest minds in the industry from the comfort of your own home, all at the fraction of the cost of those weekend courses? This is where Masterclass by Physio Network comes in. Imagine having front row access to the world's leading experts breaking down complex topics into digestible, module-based video courses. It's basically like Netflix for physios, and it gives you the option to learn about a ton of different topics. If you're interested in a particular area, the chances are that Physio Network already has a masterclass on it, or they're working on one right now. Masterclass is your ticket to staying relevant, informed, and delivering the best care possible to your patients. Click the link in the show notes and use the discount code NOAH10 at checkout to get an exclusive 10% off on Masterclass. Don't miss this opportunity to elevate your expertise. If you're still unsure, test it out with a 7-day free trial. You're going to love it. So there's so much testing, and I do want to get into a little bit about just like how you go about doing that online. But it is such a shame that the insurance companies don't help people for the long run, and there's just so much more to it than just meeting your day-to-day function, because you can do that even when your torque to body weight ratios are really low and the symmetry is really low. So it's clearly not enough, and it just highlights the importance of testing, right? So how do you go about doing that online? Like you mentioned earlier, early ACL rehab, you are trying to get someone to get back to walking, as
Yep.
normally and as quickly as you can. Is that
Mm-hmm.
just a filling process, and are you giving them coaching tips through that? Like how do you go about that?
Yep. Yeah. So I would say that I will say that I oftentimes, and I am very lucky at this point, or feel fortunate to, being 10 years into working in this field, and through, clinical athlete level up, we have a pretty robust network at least in the United States, of people. So oftentimes, depending on where people are geographically, I know someone I can send them to test to, and I like somebody that I can trust.
Oh,
So
cool.
that's a huge advantage. So oftentimes I will, as soon as they're deciding to sign on for coaching with us, then I'm already connecting them with somebody who I know they can go to and see like serially, because testing is done and interpreted best if it's done repeatedly. So
Mm,
that's one piece. But from the early aspect, I do often, even if it's not somebody I know, I do recommend and feel good with them seeing someone in person once a week for things like, we do a pretty good job of showing them how to do patellar mobs and a lot of video based stuff and all this stuff that we filmed, like part of onboarding and everything like that. Um, but it is sometimes helpful to have, somebody's eyes on it. They can do things like girth measurements for us. If the PT is open to it, we communicate with them as far as things that we may want to see. And I think it's also just a little bit of like a psychological comfort for people to just have somebody's eyes on it and hands on it in those first at least 2 to 4 weeks. Sometimes people will stay with the person for the first few months, and I'm totally fine with that.
right.
Um, at that After that point, I think like when both parties would be ideally prescribing exercise, like that's just kind of left up to us.
Yeah.
Um, and then at that point, it's kind of just going in for the periodic testing. But I think to your point, as far as walking, like we have a lot of at this point sort of exercise library and basically drills that they film, and then we give feedback on every single video that they submit.
Wow.
It's part of what they're paying for, is just that very individualized piece. So we want to make sure, like, are they able to really activate the quads at end range and fully extend when they're doing a march? Can they
Mm,
step over low hurdles without hiking their hip or rotating their foot out and doing kind of like a whip? And then in those cases, sometimes where it's like hard for them to maybe understand, or maybe it's not as easily typed out, we'll screen record and like voice over and like, hey, this is what I'm talking about.
oh, wow.
So the cool thing has been, especially actually some of it the later stages, because I was worried about that in the beginning as far as like even getting to some of the performance phases.
Right.
Um, Full transparency. So, but what I was pleasantly surprised with was the utility of, in the app you can actually slow mo the video.
Mm,
So when we record something and we're trying to explain a concept, I can play it back. I can, so it actually, I almost felt like a lot of times things that I maybe wouldn't be able to pick up on like naked eye in real time, that these videos almost enhanced my ability to give some feedback.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's been really cool too, because I think I know myself. Like if I'm reading something, um, I don't retain very well. I need to see it. I need to do it and mess up.
Mm,
So that's been a really cool thing. And we don't do that for every single movement, but for certain things that are really critical, and maybe like after a couple of days of trying this or a couple of weeks of trying it, they're still not quite getting it. We have that in our repertoire to like, and it's no different than if I were to film, like I would do the same thing in the clinic. If something was repeatedly like, I could tell it wasn't fully getting through from a movement retraining perspective,
mm-hmm.
I'd film it and I'd show them,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a, it's very similar in that way.
Cool. And it is cool that you can slow things down in real time, because when you're in the clinic, you obviously can't do that. Yeah, of course, if something was filmed, you could go back later on and do it. But again, those are those unpaid hours, right? And speaking of
Mm-hmm.
payment, is this a cash-based thing? Or is it through insurance? And do you work with people all over the country and or internationally even?
Yeah, so it is cash pay. So technically, they sign a waiver too, and this is basically virtual coaching or performance coaching. Um, so everybody knows that going in. There are some cases where depending on like the flexibility of somebody's HSA or FSA, like I know for instance, my sister has really good insurance through the company that she works, and she basically has like a debit card that's her HSA that she can put money onto and basically use like within some constraints, um, like for something like coaching or fitness or health and wellness sort of thing, anything under that umbrella,
Hmm.
and or prescriptions, like she can just use that card. So
Wow.
because like we just use Stripe as a payment system, so as long as it's a valid card, some people can use that. Um, but no, yeah, it is cash based, and yeah, we've had actually my very first client. I'll have to shout out to G. I'll tell him to listen to this, but he is still with us, and he's in Dubai.
Wow.
It was he when I was first toying with doing this, and then finally decided to do it. He had been in touch with me about he had been asking me on Instagram some things, and I sent him some resources, and um, he basically almost was like begging me to take him as a client. I was like, I don't know, like and so he took the leap with me, and he's still with us. But yeah, we have. I'm trying to think of the other areas. There have been 3 in Dubai, thanks to G. Um, 1 or 2 in the UK. Talked to someone in Ireland. So yeah, there and it's kind of wild
It's
because
so
the
cool.
internet is the internet.
Yeah, it's limitless. I spoke to Stephanie Philbay last week about the cross bracing protocol. And
Yeah.
she was saying how
Mm.
there's just tons of people that want her to help, like that want Steph's help with the cross bracing protocol, but they are international, right? So she's now connecting people all over the globe, and it's cool to see ACL care, which again is something that's complex and rigorous, being administered online. It's cool. I think it gives people way more options, and I think that's great because if someone is in a setting or a city or a town where there's just not great care around, they have options as long as they have some Wi-Fi and obviously the cash at hand
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, and I think that that's also an important point too, because that was a worry of mine as far as like, am I going to weed people out that really need something like this and can't afford it?
Right.
And
I was
what
gonna ask
I
about that actually.
yeah, and what I've gathered from people, because again, like it's it's been helpful to get feedback from people as far as like, okay, I know oftentimes by the time people are coming to me, they're well aware of how important this is. You know what I mean? Like they've done their homework.
Yeah.
They're pretty invested in this process ideally, and they understand kind of the gravity of everything. And when telling people my prices, I have asked people like, is this kind of what you expected? Is this, and majority of the time, people, their rationale is like, between my insurance premium per month, my co-pays, and then once you meet your deductible, you may still have to pay a certain percentage co-insurance of certain things until you meet your out-of-pocket max. They're like, between all those things, like I've talked to people who their copay is anywhere between like 45 and $75. So if they're going 2 or 3 days a week, that actually works out to be less than what it
Mm.
would come out per month. And we currently have people commit to either a 3 or 6 month initial time, and it's like payment for that chunk of time, not necessarily like per visit, or it's really like you're signing on kind of as a commitment with us. And there's payment plans, so that's something I'll always have too. Like there's essentially my core value with that is like, if there is if the only reason that someone wouldn't opt, like if they know they need it, we know that we can help them, and the only reason is like not even necessarily the total price, but just how we have the initial pit, like we can figure something out. Like it's really not
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
not something that, and I've realized that it's in some ways, if you do some of the math, I don't know if that means that we need to change our prices or not, but like when you do the math, it's like for some people it is less than what it would cost, including their insurance premium, at least in this country. And I what they're getting in comparison
Right.
is, obviously I'm biased, but like that's the reason why I created this, is to make it something that is incredibly valuable for people.
Well, I mean, when you just lay out the facts about it, the value is clearly there, right?
Yeah.
Yes, of course, some people really value in-person care, and that's fair.
Yep.
But to have to, like, set the price aside, one option, you're getting this. I don't want to say around the clock, but close to care and attention from someone, right? Where you can help someone on any day. I don't know if you take days off or how that works, but or
There's a
you're
little
seeing
less on the
someone.
weekend.
Okay, so that's good. You get some time to yourself. Um,
Yeah.
versus seeing someone for half an hour 2 or 3 times a week, and then when you consider the insurance again, and some people they'll only get covered for about 3 months. At some point, some people are going to have to pay completely out of pocket, right? Especially if they want really good care for this process that could take minimum 9 months.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people end up after anywhere between 3 and 6 months, six if they're lucky, they end up just having to go to self pay anyway in clinic.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of my patients were. And then like wait around for their insurance to reset,
Right.
which is just like, and some insurances would only allow, this is the intimacy with which I had to learn all this, but like some insurance would only allow a certain number of visits per diagnosis ever. So it wouldn't even matter. Like if they met 60 visits in the year and change after, I'm sorry,
Hmm.
the few months and change after, like then they would indefinitely have to pay for that particular diagnosis unless the diagnosis code changed, which
Wow.
sometimes we would have it changed to like right knee pain instead of like literally we would have to do those things in order for people to afford to be able to come in. Like a $40 copay versus $100 self pay is like makes a big difference.
Right. For sure. Wow. So we've spoken a bit about the timeline here and how rigorous of a process this is. Do you want to get into a little bit of ACL specific stuff outside of, I guess, the online realm, or is there anything else you want to touch on before we move on?
No, I think we touched on some things that probably people might be confused about or have doubts
Yeah.
about too. I will say too that like I'm like I want to be fully honest with people too that like there are one like I my dream is to also have a physical space and to be able to offer hybrid and to always have a fully virtual branch because of people that are in areas that don't have access to good, like for instance I had an amazing client who was in like rural Mississippi somewhere, and her doctor basically said after about 8 to 10 weeks of rehab, like, you're good. And
Yeah.
she was like, I'm not good. And like, she didn't know
Yeah.
what to do. So for those kind of situations, and even overseas, like, we'll always have a branch. But I 1,000,000% like, I do miss being in person with people. I want to, have the all the testing equipment and the space to actually do like speed training and stuff like that. Like that's the ultimate goal. It's just been really rewarding and works in my own life right now for where we are. And it's it's just been really like I love it. So it's one of those things where it solved a problem for sure.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm sure there's probably some people that would listen to this and just be like, well, it can't just be all sunshine and rainbows. And it's like, no, it's not. Like it's a pain in the ass sometimes to figure out testing for people, but we do it. And like,
Yeah.
would I rather just have that at my disposal to be able to use whenever I want? Yeah. I'm just not there yet. So
Right. And then you're not casting as wide of a net too, right? Because if you're not able
It's more local.
to, exactly, yeah, it's more global, which is so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were talking about performance there. I can imagine that being a pretty big barrier sometimes. Just not even people finding the right place to test, but also the place to do their exercises when they're getting into the later stages. Is there
Yeah.
anything that you do to help mitigate that in those late stages?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's twofold. There's really only been we've been doing this for almost 3 years, probably a handful. So I would say a lot of we get a lot of skiers, to be honest, too. And the nice thing about that is that skiing is one of those things where, especially skilled skiers, they can, again, our program can be very much tailored to the type of plyometrics, rate of force development. We can get force plate testing, that kind of thing, that really, from a physical capacity standpoint, can reassure us pretty well that they're at least, physically ready. It is one of those sports that it's so hard to recreate. It's
Yeah.
not a field or court sport where we can like ramp up cutting and change of direction. So part of that's been really cool is like having the conversation with people where we're like, okay, all of these things mentally and physically are checked. Here's some rules. Just a morning or a half day, only bunny hill and greens, rest where you need to, like those kinds of things, and they just have to start doing it. So it's interesting for certain sports like that.
Yeah.
Um, it is almost, I wouldn't say easier, but I think like maybe a slightly smoother transition.
Right. Makes
Whereas,
sense.
like for instance, right now, yeah, like for instance, right now we have a collegiate soccer player who, and I have to 100% shout out and credit Azita. And Azita, I will butcher her last name, but um, she is director of rehab for the XFL and a very good friend and colleague. And um, Les Spellman and all his stuff, I've learned a crap ton from both of them as far as actually like teaching speed, teaching deceleration,
Mm.
and those kinds of things. Where again, that's not something we learn in school. So
Oh,
we know
certainly
the
not.
concepts. You know what I mean? Like the physics end of the concepts. Reading books like Force by Dan Cleather and like all these like the Encyclopedia of Strength and Conditioning, like that's all, like all that kind of comes together so that we can actually program, for instance, this particular athlete's week, she has 6 days planned. One
Mm.
of those is like an off mobility day, but two of them are a field work session and sprinting plus a lift, tempo runs, a steady state run, like based on her position in soccer. And so from a physical prep side, it's no different than like hiring a strength coach. That the expertise of the program being tailored towards somebody who's coming back from an injury, particularly ACL, that's
Yeah.
the nuance piece that makes a difference. But between that and then just really having like, we have colleagues out there that can do a 505 test. You can do, you know, for soccer, you might have to run the beep test. You can just start to do those sort of things from a performance side. So again, it is individual, but that's one thing that I will say definitely is an ongoing learning process. But part of that is learning from people smarter than you in that realm.
Mm-hmm.
And I've dove pretty deep this past year, particularly into the performance side. It's been an interest of mine, but also something that in clinic, because we would have people's journeys cut short usually due to insurance, it was something that I didn't actually have that many reps of seeing
Yeah.
someone all the way through.
Right.
So I feel like this is another piece that it's been selfishly awesome for me, because now I get to do that last piece that I feel like often is missing. Like you get the end of rehab and then you go back to sport. There's a whole phase of addition, at least I believe, like physical prep and performance that needs to happen before you start to gradually go back to sport. So
Oh
it's
yeah.
it's allowing for that too.
Yeah, it is the fun part. I am cognizant of the fact that you have to leave fairly soon. I'm going to give you a question here. We're talking a lot about return to sport testing, and that sometimes, not sometimes, I mean, in all the cases, there will be some individualization of what is really important to test. And we spoke about soccer and skiing. So, are there tests that are ubiquitous? So you give to everybody, no matter the sport, when it comes to return to sport testing? And what are some tests that you might use for a skier that you might not use for a soccer player, and vice versa?
Yeah, so always strength testing at the minimum, and by that I mean either isometric or isokinetic. If they have access to isokinetic, at the very least 60 degrees per second, and an isometric test at either 60 or 90 degrees of knee flexion on the isokinetic machine. Because, and I know you've spoken to Eric, so you guys may have talked about that. I'll have to listen to that episode. Hugely influenced by Eric, so can't also go through a podcast about ACL stuff without mentioning the Godfather himself. But he was the first person that I learned from about looking at the actual curve of the isometric on the isokinetic machine. So you can do isometric testing with like a Tyndek or an inline dynamometer, which is great, but what you won't get is the visual, you know, depicted picture of the force over time, which is impulse. And when you're talking about impulse, basically with the isometric, we're looking at that initial peak of force. So you're trying to kick out as hard and fast as you can into an immovable shin bar. And if that, you want that slope to be almost directly straight up and to stay at your peak for that, whatever, 3 to 5 seconds. And that is a good indicator of, like, again, your ability to produce force quickly, and to get to a high enough peak force relative to your body weight. So that's why I like to have both of those done on the isokinetic machine if we can. And then if I were to pick like totally ubiquitous, because I feel like there is definitely some variability in also what people end up having access to. Would love to get force plate testing, because sometimes that can pick up on things that maybe the strength testing isn't as, what's the correct word, sensitive for. Meaning like a lot of the next thing that becomes really important after just making sure that you can get enough peak force relative to your body weight, like those norms, is your rate. And so how quickly you can generate force. And the reason that's important with an ACL injury, especially non-contact, but ACL injuries happen in like hundredths of a second. So if your ability, and again, it's not going to fully prevent another injury, but if you are strong enough and your active stabilizers, like the muscles around the joint, are able to react quickly and with high force, you are in a better position, because if you think of field and court sports, you are needing to react to other bodies and different things where you are at super high speeds, and your knee is not always going to be in the most optimal position. Like a lot of sports that are cutting, you're going to kind of be in maybe that not, you can't predict or control how you're going to be on the field or court. You need to just play your sport. So
Yeah.
the thought behind that is like having as much active stabilizing strength and quickly producing strength as possible. So I would say that those two, well, three measures, but two machines, are probably what would be across the board. And then as far as things that I might have a skier test versus a field or court sport athlete, unless it's volleyball, like skiing and volleyball are also like kind of similar in this way. But and Laura Opsidal talks about this, and that's where I originally got this from. So I'll have to shout out another this is godmother, not godfather.
I love all
Of
the
ACL
shout outs.
I mean, I honestly like I wouldn't be in this spot without these people, So it's where I can, I would love to give them some credit too. But repeated single leg jump. So a 10 rep single leg jump on the force plates, and then different side to side as far as eccentric rate of force development. Different systems will call things different things. They might say like push off power or something like that versus like concentric rate of force development, jump height.
Right.
And then you could also take a look at things qualitatively. But I think the endurance jumping for things like skiing and volleyball are things that that would be an example of something that I might want kind of whoever's doing the testing to, hey, can you add this on and give me these
Yeah.
parameters, sort of thing.
Love it. Love it. What about a drop landing or something like that for skiing or volleyball?
Yes, probably single leg. The only, I'm sorry, probably more so double leg because, and this is going to actually be something I've talked to Laura about this too. This may be individualized because if you think about the task of a drop jump, especially a single leg, it's really hard to execute.
Yeah.
So unless people are, again, they're inherently just somebody who moves really well and they're kind of very springy, they have that good and high impulse, like it's almost like they have to learn the skill of the test to be able
Yeah.
to accurately draw from it what you want to draw. And the biggest thing is like, is this test done well enough by the person that I can actually make a decision based off of the results? And that's where I think sometimes a single leg drop jump in particular, that gets a little fuzzy for me
Mm.
because a lot of people, especially if they haven't done a lot of that stuff prior, might just not execute it well.
Yeah. I suck at it.
It's really hard, right? Like,
It
and if
is.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking about doing it on my ACL leg versus the other one, and forget it. Like, I'm not getting off the ground in any amount of time that would clear me for anything.
Yeah. 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 Cool. Anything for soccer?
I'm trying
You
to think of
mentioned
the difference between
505.
those two. Yeah, it would probably be more of the field testing. So the 505 is nice because it's a really hard, like full sprint, 180-degree change of direction, and to do it really accurately. Eric actually just talked about this a little bit on the Rethinking Rehab podcast with Shelby, but um, it to do it like the most accurately, ideally you have like the timing gates and everything like that. But to be honest, Eric even talks about it like you do need you need a team, like the person and probably two other administrators to be really um, consistent with the setup and everything. And he's used markers, cones or whatever to explain it. They do some trials, and then somebody starts at um, the end line and just has a stopwatch. And so as soon as they're, because you think about it too, like if you've done the test enough as the um, administrator of it, then as long as you're within a couple tenths of a second, then you're probably getting a pretty good idea of the difference in time when you're
Right.
pushing off of the surgery versus non-surgery side. And then you can also have another person film it from the side and from straight on to take a look at particularly that penultimate step that
Mm-hmm.
that starts the deceleration.
Right. Which is key. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, love it. We have hardly scratched the surface. I think even saying that might be an overstatement because there is a lot to get into. We just covered a little bit of return to sport testing, but we didn't dive in to the keys for optimizing early stage rehab, what the middle stages might look like, and just like what like strength and conditioning can look like as well. So maybe that's a topic for another day because I
Absolutely.
do think even though we scratched the surface, we did cover a lot and I appreciate it. I think the perspective that you bring with, how you can provide really high value care to this population, it's insightful. It really is for a lot of people. And I hope that it maybe gives some people motivation to start their own online businesses and really just start to think outside of the box about their care. So once
Yeah.
again, thank you. Is there anything thing that you want to add, and where can people reach you if they want to contact you or follow your work?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you nailed it. I think if, if we do this again and maybe have a little bit more of just a straight up nerd session, I'm totally fine with that. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, I am mostly, we are planning to actually have build a website next year. That's a 2024 goal. But for the most part, all information and where I'm most active is on Instagram. That's just stephalen.dpt. If like I said, in general, not only from a motivating other clinicians, hopefully, and having them think outside the box, but also for people who are going through this injury or learning that they're oftentimes people are just trying to consume however much information they can once they know that they have an ACL injury. And, if some of the resources that you feel like are available at your fingertips are maybe not what you think you need, like I hope these kinds of things give you hope.
Mm,
And if there's general questions too, I'm fine with people emailing me. It's just steph@aclresolve.com. Um, happy to share as much as I can.
cool. Awesome. Steph, thank you so much. Nice talking to you.
Thank you, Noah. Likewise.
Thank you once again for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a review. If you would like to follow me on social media, you can follow me at noahmandel.physio on Instagram and TikTok. Have a wonderful day, and remember to keep moving forward.